Whenever you connect to the internet with any device, you are connecting to this bowl of macaroni, a bunch of cables that run across the oceans and seas and connect the entire world together. But what you're seeing is the main fiber optic lines that run across the oceans. There are a lot more lines inland, but if you wanted to show a map of those, you couldn't even see where you are. Whenever you connect to the internet with your cell phone or wireless device, you think everything is connected wirelessly, but it's not the case. From your cell phone, it connects to the closest antenna, but after the antenna, the internet is pretty much connected with wires, fiber optic cables to be exact. The cables that run inland are very important, but the most advanced and the most important ones are ran across seas. And the powerhouse of world's internet are these wires. When you're entering the wire in shallow waters, a machine like this enters the water and buries it deep into the sand, so nobody has access to it. People can't destroy it, and of course, all marine life can have access to it. The cables that go into the sea are very sophisticated and powerful, so nothing can have access to the actual wire in the middle. But if the fiber optic cable is supposed to go to deep waters, the quality goes up a notch, and it's much more complicated than the shallow water ones. Not only is it more thick, but it also has more layers of protection, because underneath the ocean, the extreme pressures will destroy it if it's not. We've made plenty of videos how insane the deep waters of the ocean is, and what happens when you go down a certain percentage. The pressure that's available there crushed OceanGate, and the cable is no different. That means the cable that's ran across deep waters, it's not buried like the shallow ones, because if a machine goes down there, they will be buried as well. Usually the wires that are laid into the ocean, just like anything, they require maintenance and repair. Until the depth of 30 meters, a normal scuba diver can go down there and repair it. But when it goes below 30 meters, everything gets a lot more complicated, and the cost to repair and maintain it goes up a notch. But how are deep water cables repaired? You might not believe it, but scuba divers have went down up to 600 meters, but this is no normal equipment. There are very special equipment and clothing they have to wear to handle that pressure, and it also has a chamber around them so they don't get crushed. They also do not send normal people. They send people that are very trained, and they have lived inside a pressure chamber for up to a month, so they can withstand that pressure for a long period of time and work down there hours on end. Usually these underwater cables require maintenance and repair after years of working. So when they get down there are a lot of rust and living plants that grew on it. So first of all, they have to blast it with the water pressure down there that takes the seawater and smashes it like a sandblaster. And after a while, they finally have access to the cable itself. When the cable is damaged in a location, they first repair it, and they line it with this piece of steel. It is a half-inch thick piece of steel, and it also has anti-rust material sprayed on top of it. When they hug the cable with this, they first put the nuts and bolts and use a hydraulic underwater equipment to tighten it. A tool like this is very important to do the job properly, but the job is still not done. After that, they have to weld the entire half-inch thick steel to the cable itself, so it's completely shut off from the world. You might think that underwater cables are something new, but that's not the case, because the first cable that ran through the seas was in the year 1850, and it connected France and England together through the English Channel. Back then there was no telephone or internet. This was made for the telegraph. The English and the French thought they did something revolutionary, but the Americans did something bigger. Since they were so far away from the rest of the world, they decided to run an Atlantic underwater telegraph line. Even though at that time it was extremely advanced for these cables to be running through the ocean, but they were not that high of a quality. The telegraph signals were sent via electricity, but each letter would take 2 minutes to get to Europe and back. You might say they didn't know what electricity was back then. I thought Edison made that clear. But no, people knew what electricity was, and they knew that electricity is the reason the signal goes through. They just didn't know how to properly control it. Years pass and the quality of these cables get better and better. And then we get to 1876, when Alexander Graham Bell invents the telephone. But the telephone wasn't going to go worldwide anytime soon. Things like this take a lot of time to go worldwide. The telephone grows in Europe and the United States, but these two continents are not connected. When they want to communicate, they use telegraph still. And then finally, in the 1920s, they decide to run a telephone line through the Atlantic Ocean. But they wanted to run a wire that could have better speeds than the telegraph. And then finally, in the year 1927, the first telephone line goes through the Atlantic Ocean, meeting Europe. But when we get to 1956, something revolutionary happens. The first copper cable is created to run through the Atlantic Ocean, because beforehand it was usually iron and it didn't have the connection the copper ones had, and this caused the speed of communication to go higher. So this meant the delay was about 2 seconds. Right now 2 seconds is a little high, but back then it was insane and revolutionary, because you can finally have a conversation with someone across the world. The copper cable does its job for 20-30 years, but still humans don't stand still and they advance. This is when fiber optic cables are invented. You have to know that this is the 1980s and these cables are being run for the telephone, not internet. But it finally caused the world to have instant communication because the signals were being sent with light, so everything was light speed. But in the beginning, it was only a line that ran from the US to England, and it was gonna take a long time before the entire world was connected with each other. When this line was finally finished and the entire world was connected, it was kind of like having the whole world in your pocket, which is exactly what it's like today. You know exactly what is happening across the world at the tip of your fingers. But why is this called the light cable or fiber optic cables? Because it literally works with light. Ever since the fiber optic cable was invented, it has never stood still and continued on advancing. The cables that were made in the 80s versus the cables made today are 1,000,000 times faster. The cables made today are a lot higher quality, and it's not like the ones before that cause a lot of problems. The cables are so strong that if a ship were to drop off its anchor and get stuck to the wire, it won't rip it apart. But even though it's rare for them to break, it still ran across the world. There are different companies that get contracted to repair and maintain these, and they cost a lot of money to do. What will happen if one of these cables gets disconnected? Does the entire world's internet get disconnected? No, because this is like a unit that's all connected with each other. If the signal realizes that there is a problem with one line, it won't go through it. It goes backwards and goes from another line, so it never truly disconnects. And that basically means there is never a dead end. You guys already know Starlink. They're supposed to give satellite internet to the entire world. Do you think the world is moving towards this direction? But that's not the case, because there's a lot of different companies that are investing a whole lot of money to make these fiber optic cables more advanced. And still, the fastest internet in the world right now is fiber optic internet. So that shows us that fiber optic cables are gonna be here for a while until we finally move to wireless. But maybe we'll never go wireless because wires are truly faster. What do you guys think?